Hi, John Baldoni here. Welcome to a very special edition of Grace Under Pressure. As you know, I am typically the host of this show, but today I'm also the guest, so you could call me the guest host or the host guest, whatever that is. Today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to sing for my supper. Metaphorically, I'm going to play a little bit of music and I'm going to talk about the themes of my new book, Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside Down World. And I call this a reflective recital, which is frankly a term I made up. So what does reflective recital mean? Well, it's a little bit of music, it's a little bit of presentation, and we'll talk about themes of the moods and emotions and feelings that we as individuals and leaders were experiencing in our time of pandemic. And so today I'll start off with a little bit of music to set the tone. It's call this an air in A minor. That little tune sums up, I think, the feeling of angst and dislocation we all felt last year. And the subtitle of my book is Leading in an Upside Down World. And certainly last year was an upside down world. As my friend and colleague C.B. Bowman says, we experienced 5 major things last year. Of course, there was the coronavirus. We had economic fragility. We had racial injustice come to the fore. We had significant episodes of climate change with hurricanes and massive fires. And then also we had a very contentious election. So 2020 was a pretty upside down year, and I hope one that none of us experience again. And so the mood of that was fear. Initially, I remember when we first had our lockdown, I remember walking out on my back patio and honestly asking myself, will I ever work again? Because we had not yet shifted to virtual. I had speaking engagements lined up, coaching engagements, and all of those were in person. So what was I going to do next? And of course, the economic crisis was such that nobody was hiring externals, people like me. So I really had fear about what's going to happen next. And it was that very unsettling feeling. And I know that I was not alone in that feeling. And so how did I cope with fear? Well, I started putting my thoughts down and I started doing a series of videos, which eventually became the genesis of this book. But fear was palpable. And it was for leaders, fear as that emotion that you feel, but you don't want to reveal too much. Think of the fire battalion captain on site of a fire. If you see him or her, they often seem to be the most calm person on site. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of fire, there's a lot of heat, and people running around. Yet they're calm, they're directing it. They are sublimating their fear. And I think that is so important in our time of the pandemic, is to deal with the fear. And of course, what happens is stress too. And so let me play a little piece that deals with stress. kind of calms us down. And stress there's a positive stress, which we call eustress, and then there's a negative stress, which we call distrust. And I came across and I wrote a piece about this for Forbes, and there was a beautiful story by a poet. His name is Ocean Vuong. His last name is Vuong, Vietnamese, and he told the story about losing his uncle, who was very close to him. And when the news hit him, he was quite upset, obviously, and so he took to the streets walking and walking and walking. And he noticed, this was in New York City, and he noticed the fire escapes, things he maybe had not been conscious of before, and every building seemed to have its own fire escape. And he thought to himself, as we process our emotions, think if you could be in one of those apartments with a fire escape. Could you not go out the window or the door, whatever it is, and stand on that fire escape? And that would be your safe place. And I think as we deal with stress, all of us need a safe space, a place where we can reflect on what's happening, share confidences with friends. It's a fire escape, if you will. And it's a beautiful metaphor that Ocean Vuong came up with, and I like that way he processes it. And it's a way of finding our safe space is a way to deal with the stress around us. And also, as what we're dealing with, of course, during the pandemic, was that sense of dislocation. We were cut off from our place of work, from our families at times, our extended families, certainly, our friends, our colleagues. We were in this lockdown state. And so there was this, what's the point of all this? And it was dark, dark days. And so I'm going to play a little piece here. And I want you to just reflect for a moment as I play. How were you feeling a year or so ago? What were the emotions you were feeling? And write them down or put them in the chat if you so choose. So what were the feelings of dislocation? And I'll do a little piece here. Fighting back or dealing with discouragement, what does it take? Courage. And one of and courage is not the absence of fear, it's the management of fear. And that's been said by everyone or many people, like Franklin Roosevelt said a variant of that, John McCain said a variant of this, both of whom had known crisis and were physically tested, certainly. And so they knew fear. But one of my favorite quotes about fear comes from John F. Kennedy, who was a true man of action in his young days. He fought in the South Pacific as a commander of a PT boat, which was sunk somewhere in the South Pacific. And he managed to get his crew off the boat, and they ended up on an island, but no one knew they were there. So he took it upon himself to swim out into the mission in the middle of these against the swift currents between islands at night and wave a torch or something so a passing boat might see him. Hopefully that boat would not be an enemy boat. But he did this day after day, and they were rescued. But so anyway, Kennedy you could call him a war hero. I don't think he would describe that, but he was called that. But what he said about heroism, I think and courage is very important to where we are right now. He said that courage is less the heroic act, like him swimming into shark-infested waters, but it's the daily dealing with moments of crisis and tension and all the things and physical ailments, or we're worried about our family, elder care situation, child care situation, challenges at work, all of these things, and how we deal with it, how we face these things are the measure of who we are as people. So we lead with courage, and that's something that all leaders that I know of, and last year, the folks that I worked with as a coach, I saw them rise to the occasion. I saw them take on the burden, and I saw them stand forward and rally people together. And they led with real courage. But of course, the flip side of courage is doubt. And we've grown to fear doubt. We like certainty, and certainly last year was certainly the great year of doubt, the great year of ambiguity. Our employees were crying out for, can you give us clarity? Is there an answer? What it is? And of course, there were no answers. But then there was also self-doubt. And imagine when you're cut off from where you are, and you're in isolation, and day after day after day, there's doubts. Am I doing the right thing? And in this regard, I think doubt can be our friend. Why? Doubt challenges us to challenge our own assumptions. And I know if you're like me, you can get wrapped up in your own assumptions, being so convicted and so convinced that you're in the right path, when actually you might be that path might be taking you up a blind alley. And so doubt is that check on us. It is that guard against where we are. And we learn to embrace it and make it work for us rather than against us. So if you were feeling doubt last year, think a moment and how you dealt with it as I play this little air. And doubt dissipates. One of the ways we deal with doubt and managing it is through resilience. And as viewers of this show know, that in the nearly 100 episodes I've done, resilience is a theme. And I've had the opportunity to talk to thought leaders and doers, but I also had the opportunity to talk to a former Navy SEAL and a former Royal Marine, both of whom were highly, highly trained and highly stressful situations. And when you're in training for combat missions and going into extreme danger, as the Royal Marines or the Navy SEALs do, you have to learn how to keep it together. And so their exercises are very rigorous and very challenging. And the one thing they learn is cohesion. And the Navy SEAL told me, he said, we have a real brotherhood. We genuinely love one another. We support one another. But they also practice and practice and practice and train and train and train, so that when they are in a true crisis situation, a combat situation, They feel fear, but they know how to sublimate it. They know how to deal with it. And so they become resilient. We saw this resilience in our healthcare workers last year. Though men and women on the front lines, our nurses, our physicians, our staffs, our aides, even healthcare executives managing the hospitals, and they were dealing with something they had never, ever seen before and doing it day after day. And they, some broke under the pressure, but others learned to cope and are examples for us. They learned resilience. They had resilience before, but they put resilience into the fore. They practiced it, and they came out and they served their patients and made our world safer for it. So resilience is so essential when dealing with times of crisis, okay? And another side, if you kind of flip the concept of resilience, it's thinking to a better time. You know, when we're in a time of crisis, we shut down, or we tend to come within ourselves. There's an instinct to hoard. Well, we all saw that last year with toilet paper. I mean, who would have thought? But yep, toilet paper became a scarcity. So now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, but even last year, the word, so many people that inspired me, what I saw their example, and a word that cheered me up. And I saw men and women act like this. And I saw children do this too. And it was the word abundance. We shared what we had. We did not hoard. We shared. And even if what we had was our time, only had our time, we shared our time. We acted with a spirit of abundance. We acted on the better nature of ourselves, better angels of ourselves, as Lincoln said in his second inaugural. And we saw a lot of that, and it was very reassuring. So think for a moment of moments that you saw of abundance and how you felt. And I'll play something. Abundance, a good word. The opposite occurred with grief. And it brings me to a point that why did I put these thoughts together? Why did I put these thoughts together is the sense that I believe we must reflect on where we've been and experienced before we move forward. The world of January 2020 is no more. It will not come back. Our challenge is to hold fast to the values that we had then to move forward, to make the losses mean something. And all of us have experienced loss. We have lost loved ones. We have lost colleagues, collegiality. And some of us, and so many of us, identify with our work when we could no longer go to our place of work, or we were dislocated from work. There's a loss there too. And to process it, don't forget it, mourn it. Mourning is the beginning of the healing process, acknowledging the loss and resolving to hold what we had in a cherished memory, if it's a person, a loved one, remember how special they were to us, how they made us feel, and what they taught us. All of these things, that's how we hold our memories of our loved ones dear when they've departed. And also, we've lost our way of life for some of us, but now as we're beginning to establish a new way of life, we have to remember where we were. And so for a moment here, I'll just reflect as you would on what you have lost. The challenge is put that loss to better use. One of my colleagues in a group, Marshall Goldsmith 100, is Mark Thompson. And Mark had a wonderful thought about rebuilding. And it's not simply a process of building as before, but build it better. So you think about a business you may have had or have. How can you do it better? How can you use this crisis to make it work for you? How can you build relationships? Maybe things have been frayed with good friends or even family members. How can you take that and build a new relationship? And maybe this is where grace comes in. And what I consider grace is that catalyst for the greater good. How do we put it to good use? And so we think about building and building it better. And part of that, if I'm going to build it better, it comes from a sense of confidence, believing in yourself. And so many of us, and I think it's a healthy thing, have what's called the Imposter Syndrome. And what that means is, I don't really belong here. Actually, like doubt, that is a positive emotion because it kind of keeps your ego in check. But if it becomes paralytic, where you can't move forward, then you need to recharge yourself. You need to believe in yourself. Have confidence in yourself. And where does confidence come from? It comes from inside, from having achieved something. And there's an exercise I often do sometimes with people that I coach. I say, let's take an exercise and think about the things you've accomplished. Go back to high school. You graduated high school, graduated college, got your first job. You married someone. You're still married. You had children. All of these things are accomplishments. You should feel good about that. And that should give you the confidence that you know where to go and to move forward. And so confidence, we have to believe in that. And confidence leads to something else, which is a reinforcement of our self-esteem, our self-worth, and it gets to what we can do with it. Two of my friends and colleagues, Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton, wrote a beautiful book called Leading with Gratitude. And it's about sharing and living and leading and making things better for others and showing gratitude and thankfulness for what you can do. I think we also have to show gratitude for ourselves. And that's not an attempt to give yourself a pat on the back. It's an affirmation of your humanity, what you have to offer others. Because when you believe that you have something else to offer others, you can share it with them. It might be a big thing. It might be your time. It's your space. One of the people that I admire greatly and wrote about in my book, Grace, A Leader's Guide to a Better Us, was Father Greg Boyle, who was a Jesuit priest in Los Angeles, and he started the largest gang intervention program in the world, and it's called Homeboy Industries. And he talks about in his he's also a marvelous writer, and in his second book called Barking at the Choir, he talked about the spirit of radical kinship and it's being connected to others. And so sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is our time. Share space with them. Just sit down and be there. And now we can do that. We're less virtual. And even if we're separated by distance, we can do it virtually. I will be there for you. I will listen to you. I will share your life with you. I am open to what you have to say. And that's the sense of gratitude and sense of self. And it's important to know that. And we have that capacity to do it, and it's a challenge that we have to act on it. And also, part of this sense of our isolation, it forced a lot of us to look inward. So think for a moment what you learned about yourself. What surprised you? And I'll play a little piece and you just reflect on for that moment of what you learned about yourself. I'd like to say now that some of these tunes I've been playing are my improvisations on a book called Arnold Songs, and they were assembled by Arnold Book of Old Songs. They were assembled by a composer, Roger Quilter. And Arnold was, Arnold Grayson Vivian was, was Roger Quilter's nephew. And he was a Brit. And Arnold was was killed in the First World War. I want to say the Battle of the Somme, I'm not sure, but certainly it was lost. So all those who knew him mourned him. And so as a tribute, Arnold put these songs together of old English compositions, and they have a kind of meditative quality to them, and I find them rich forms of reflection, so I wanted to play them. I don't know that I always played them accurately, but for that I apologize to Mr. Quilter, but they do make us think, and they do challenge our ability to see beyond ourselves. And that's what I wanted to experiment with today with music. Music transports us, takes us to another dimension. It is emotional. It is visceral, and actually psychologists and physiologists have studied the impact of music on the human body, and it's certain tunes, poignant tunes or whatever, can actually raise the hair on the back of one's skin, whatever, and there's a physiological reaction. Heart rate will change, all of these things, and it's a remarkable thing, and music has this transformative formative quality about it. And each of us can remember songs from our youth or songs we like now that when we hear them, they instantly transport us back to that moment when we first heard them, or a moment of our teenhood or college years or whatever it was. And so music has that special extra dimension to it. And so that's what I'm experimenting with today. And as we go forward, there's a thought I want to say. And now that we're coming out of the pandemic, and our challenge is to do things new and differently, but let's also keep something in mind. It's a wonderful thought, and it's a great little movie I saw. It's called Ride Like a Girl. And it's a true story of the first woman jockey to have won the Melbourne Cup in Melbourne, Australia. And her father was her coach and mentor. And there's a wonderful scene that they have where he's talking about what it is to ride. And you imagine when you're on the back of this 2,000-pound beast, which is going pretty fast, 40 miles an hour, maybe faster. And he said, you get into the mix. And he said, and then slow, patience. And he said, wait. And then boom, you'll see an opening and you go. And I think for some of us, we're already there, but other of us maybe are waiting for that space. And when you see that space open, go for it. And as there's a thought I want to talk about, the power of grace. And it's a reflection that I have. It's in the book. And I put it in some thoughts, and excuse me, I'm just gathering my notes here, because I have a terrible memory and I can't remember often what I write. So anyway, I said grace under pressure. What does it do? It meets anger with composure, denigration with respect, sadness with compassion, scarcity with abundance, insults with smiles, selfishness with selflessness, hoarding with generosity, life with gratitude. And all of those thoughts come together, and I think that grace is that catalyst for the greater good. And it's it's a very powerful act. And the great thing about it, grace, is that it's given to us, no strings attached. It's ours to do with what we will. We make it work for us. And in that, if we receive it, we pass it along to others. It's a simple concept of intended acts of kindness, or pay it forward. And as I close out today, there's something that came to me, and I touched on this a bit, about how do we make this crisis? How do we make this pandemic? How do we give meaning to it? Well, I thought of a scene, and you remember the movie came out more than 20 years ago, Saving Private Ryan, which was about a troop of soldiers commanded by Colonel Tom Miller, or Captain Tom Miller, looking for Private Ryan, who was the sole surviving son of a family back home. And they were there to take him out of it. And it's set in World War II, right after D-Day. And so they're traipsing through France, and they have various episodes. And at the end, they find Private Ryan, and there's one final battle. And Tom Hanks, Captain Miller, is mortally wounded. And he, as his dying act, he pulls Private Ryan, who's played by Matt Damon, he pulls him close to him, and he looks at him, and he says, "Earn this. Earn this." And that means the sacrifice that we made for you, but put it to good use. And I think all of us have sacrificed. We have all had losses. Let's put it to good use. Let's make our world, what we can, a better place. And so I want to close today with a very special song that almost didn't see the light of day, and I love the story of it. It's written by Harold Arlen, who's one of my favorite composers of that era, the 30s and 40s, and Yip Harburg, Yip was a newspaper person and even a newspaper poet. And he wrote a song, and I think 1930, 31, maybe a little later. It's called Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And that was a song of despair. The voice of the person who's singing the song is a person who, in our parlance, used to be somebody, but is no more because he lost his job. And as a result, he felt he had lost his self-worth. And then for so many people, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime captured the essence, the despair that so many people felt at the beginning of the Depression, as it ground on from 1929, 30, 31, till the time of Roosevelt, and even into that. So there was a sense of hopelessness and despair. And so flash forward a couple more years, whatever, as a songwriter, and they moved to Hollywood, and he teamed up with Harold Arlen. And they were assigned to work on a major motion picture. But this particular motion picture had lots of difficulties because basically a lot of money was spent on it and a lot of new technology and things like that. And so they wrote a number of songs, but they came up with one very, very special song, but the studio people just didn't like it. And so they had no use for it. Well, fortunately, sharper minds prevailed. And I like to call this song the most inspirational, the greatest motivation song of all time, Over the Rainbow. Okay, and I'll play it for you now. Well, thank you for watching. That wraps it up, my little reflection recital. Let me know what you think about it. And till next time, thanks for watching.